April 1953, Springfield, Massachusetts. A 65-year-old man sits at a banquet table in the Kimball Hotel, holding a silver en-bloc clip loaded with 8 gold cartridges. Each cartridge is engraved with a colleague's name, a ceremonial set, the only one made for him out of more than 5 million rifles. He designed the weapon that armed the American infantry across 2 wars. He never earned $1 from any of them. This is the story of the M1 Garand, the first semi-automatic rifle adopted as the standard infantry arm of a major power, and the only one fielded at scale across an entire national army in the Second World War. It gave American infantrymen a rate of fire 2 to 3 times faster than any Axis soldier they faced. It survived a caliber killed by a general, a gas system so flawed every rifle had to be quietly recalled, and a designer who handed it to his country for nothing. But the weapon that would define a generation of American infantry almost never existed at all. To understand why the M1 Garand mattered, you have to understand what the American infantryman was carrying before it, and what that gap was costing him. In 1918, the American doughboy went to war with a bolt-action Springfield 1903. It was accurate, it was reliable, and it required its operator to pull the trigger, break his cheek weld, reach up, rotate the bolt handle 90 degrees, pull it rearward, push it forward, rotate it down, reacquire the target and fire again. A trained man could manage 15 aimed rounds per minute. The rifle on the other side of no man's land worked exactly the same way. So did every standard infantry rifle on Earth. The US Army understood the problem before the armistice ink was dry. A semi-automatic rifle, one that fired, ejected and reloaded itself with every trigger pull, would double or triple the firepower of every rifleman in the infantry without adding a single soldier to the squad. The concept was not new. What was new was the requirement. The weapon had to be reliable enough for mass issue, light enough for an infantryman to carry all day, simple enough for a conscript to maintain, and cheap enough to build by the million. No army on Earth had managed it. The nation that solved the problem first would own the most dangerous infantry on the battlefield. In 1919, a self-taught Canadian machinist named John Cantius Garand walked through the gates of Springfield Armory in Massachusetts and began trying to solve it. He had arrived in Connecticut from Quebec at age 11, learned English sweeping textile mill floors, taught himself machining by watching factory workers, and submitted a light machine gun design to the US Navy during the First World War that was good enough to get him hired by the federal government. He was not a university engineer. He was not a famous gunsmith. He was a 31-year-old immigrant with a 4th-grade education, a talent for metal, and a government salary of $1,800 a year. He would stay at Springfield for the next 34 years. Every prototype, every failure, and every breakthrough that followed belonged to the armory, and to the rifle. Garand's first design used an idea no one else had tried. When a cartridge fires, the primer, the small metal cup at the base of the round, moves backwards slightly from the pressure. Garand built a mechanism that captured that tiny movement, transmitted it through the firing pin, and used it to unlock the bolt and cycle the action. It was elegant, it worked, and in 1925 a routine ammunition change made every prototype obsolete overnight. That year, the Ordnance Department adopted a new loading of .30-06 ammunition with staked primers, crimped firmly into the cartridge case so they could not move. The change had nothing to do with Garand's rifle. It was a routine quality improvement. But it meant that every primer-actuated prototype he had built over 5 years of work was instantly and permanently useless. Garand abandoned the entire system and started over with gas operation, a conventional approach using expanding propellant gases tapped from the barrel to drive an operating piston. He designed a long-stroke piston, a rotating bolt with 2 symmetrical locking lugs, and an operating rod that would become one of the most recognizable mechanical signatures in firearms history. By 1931, the redesigned rifle, designated the T3E2, was ready for competitive trials against the best semi-automatic designs in the world. John Pedersen, the man John Moses Browning himself had reportedly called the greatest gun designer in the world, entered his T1 rifle in a smaller proprietary caliber he had developed, the .276 Pedersen. Entries also came from Thompson, Colt Browning, a Czech firm and a German firm. The tests were brutal. Garand's rifle had 60 parts. Pedersen's had 99. Pedersen's design required waxed cartridge cases to function. In one endurance run, a Garand had its stock scorched after 2,160 rounds were fired through it in 55 minutes. The Patton suffered slam fires and mechanical failures in mud. The Garand won decisively. On January 4, 1932, the Army's semi-automatic rifle board formally recommended the Garand for adoption in .276 caliber. Production of 125 rifles was requested. The rifle had beaten every competitor on the continent. 15 years of work had finally paid off. Then Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur killed it. MacArthur ordered all work on the .276 caliber to cease immediately and completely. His reasoning was logistics, not ballistics. The Army was sitting on enormous stockpiles of .30-06 ammunition left over from the First World War. The Browning automatic rifle, the .30 caliber machine guns, every crew-served weapon in the infantry ran on .30-06. Introducing a second rifle caliber during the Great Depression, when Congress could barely fund the existing army, was a fight MacArthur refused to have. One general's signature sent Garand back to the drawing board. The conversion forced a critical trade-off. The .276 version held 10 rounds in its en-bloc clip. The fatter .30-06 cartridge reduced capacity to 8. That number, 8 rounds, was an engineering constraint imposed by the physical dimensions of the ammunition, not a design choice. Garand redesigned the gas system, the bolt, and the operating rod for the heavier cartridge. On August 3, 1933, the .30 caliber version was formally designated the United States Semi-Automatic Rifle, Caliber 30 M1. But the rifle that entered production still was not the weapon that would win the war. The initial M1 used a gas trap system, a muzzle cap that captured propellant gases after the bullet left the barrel and redirected them to cycle the action. Carbon fouled the assembly. Heat deformed the gas plug. In one test, a loosened screw allowed a bullet to strike the gas plug and blow the entire front end off the rifle. Roughly 50,000 gas trap rifles were manufactured before Springfield Armory redesigned the weapon in 1940, with a conventional drilled gas port in a longer barrel. Every gas trap rifle already in service was recalled and rebuilt through a quiet retrofit program that drew little public attention. Fewer than 60 original gas trap rifles survive today. Once the gas port system was in place, the M1 Garand became unstoppable, not on the battlefield, but on the factory floor. By January 1941, Springfield Armory and Winchester were producing 600 rifles per day. By 1944, wartime urgency had pushed output to levels that dwarfed anything the pre-war armory could have imagined. Thousands of rifles per day around the clock. Unit costs fell substantially as production scaled. Springfield alone produced over 3.5 million. Winchester contributed more than 500,000. By the war's end, more than 4 million M1 Garands had rolled off American production lines. The rifle's combat debut came in the Philippines. When Japan invaded in December 1941, American and Philippine scout units on Patton carried the new weapon into their first engagements. The effect was immediate and terrifying to the enemy. Veterans later recalled that captured Japanese soldiers asked how America had managed to arm every rifleman with a machine gun. They were not machine guns, they were M1 rifles. A trained operator could fire 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute. His Japanese counterpart with a bolt-action rifle managed 10 to 15. His German counterpart with a Kar-98 managed roughly the same. The M1 did not just outshoot the enemy, it made every American rifleman sound like a squad. The first Medal of Honor of the Second World War went to a man carrying the M1 Garand. Second Lieutenant Alexander Nininga of the 57th Infantry Regiment advanced alone into Japanese-held jungle near Abukai, Patton, on January 12, 1942, hunting snipers. Described as slight of build, gentle and kind, he loaded up with grenades in his M1, shot a sniper out of a tree, destroyed several enemy positions with rifle fire and grenades, and kept advancing under artillery fire until he was killed in hand-to-hand combat. He was 23 years old. The rifle he carried, the one the army had nearly abandoned twice, put enough firepower in one man's hands to change the arithmetic of a jungle fight. A lot of these stories don't get told anywhere else. Subscribing helps make sure we can keep telling them. Now, back to the rifle. On January 26, 1945, General George S. Patton sat down and wrote a letter on 3rd Army Stationery to Major General Levin Campbell, the Chief of Ordnance. The opening line would become the most famous endorsement in the history of infantry weapons. In my opinion, Patton wrote, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised. He was not being sentimental. He was commanding the army that had fought from North Africa through Sicily, France, and into Germany, and his men had carried the M1 every step of the way. The M1 Garand was not perfect, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The 8-round en-bloc clip could not be topped off. A soldier who fired 3 rounds could not simply push 5 more into the magazine the way a rifleman with a Mauser or Lee Enfield could with a stripper clip. He either fired the remaining rounds, ejected the partial clip and loaded a fresh one, wasting ammunition, or he continued fighting with a partially loaded weapon. In a war fought largely by conscripts managing fear and adrenaline, that was a real limitation. And then there was the ping. When the last round fired, the empty en-bloc clip ejected with a distinctive metallic sound. The enduring myth says enemy soldiers listened for that ping, knew the American was empty, and rushed him during the 2 to 3 second reload. But post-war surveys of combat veterans told a different story. A Korean War-era study by the Operations Research Office found that most riflemen considered the ping useful. It told them they were empty without looking. Only a minority believed the enemy could even hear it. German veterans of Normandy reportedly called the idea of attacking after the ping laughable. In the roar of a firefight, rifles, machine guns, artillery, mortar blasts, one small metallic sound was inaudible at any meaningful distance, and no American soldier fought alone. When one rifle pinged empty, 4 more in the squad were still loaded. The 8-round clip was a constraint born from the caliber MacArthur forced on the design. The ping was a feature misremembered as a flaw. The rifle's real limitation was proof of something else entirely. It was designed for the squad, not the individual, and the squad that carried it owned every firefight it entered. The M1 Garand did not retire after 1945. It fought through Korea, where SLA Marshall's field report concluded that of all weapons carried by the infantry, the M1 appeared to be least sensitive to heavy frost, extreme cold, and icing. Troops regarded it, he wrote, with a liking amounting to affection. Its mechanical afterlife was extraordinary. Garand himself had been working on the next evolution since 1944, a select fire variant designated the T-20, with a 20-round detachable magazine and a rate of 700 rounds per minute. The war ended before it could be fielded, but the T-20 series laid the direct foundation for the M14 rifle, formally adopted in 1957. The M14 inherited the M1's gas-operated rotating bolt, its receiver architecture, its operating rod concept, and its field stripping procedure. It was, in the most literal mechanical sense, a product-improved Garand. In Italy, Beretta took the design even further, converting surplus M1 receivers into the BM-59, rechambered for NATO caliber, fitted with a detachable box magazine and selective fire capability. It served the Italian military until 1990 and armed at least 8 other nations. Today, the civilian marksmanship program still sells surplus M1 Garands to qualified American civilians, and in 2025, the CMP partnered with Heritage Arms to begin producing brand new rifles from the original 1936 design, nearly 90 years after adoption. The Springfield Armory National Historic Site in Massachusetts preserves the building where Garand worked. His personal rifles, his tools, and his prototypes are in the collection. The rifle that almost died 3 times, killed by an ammunition change vetoed by a general, sabotaged by its own gas system, outlived every weapon that competed against it. And the man who created it never saw a cent. In 1941, a congressional bill proposed paying John Garand $100,000 for his service to the nation. It failed to pass. When he received a $1,000 prize from a department store, he donated the entire amount to the Army Emergency Relief Fund. His rival, Peterson, had negotiated the right to patent his losing design and sued the government for $40,000. Garand, a civil servant, had signed his rights away. He retired in 1953 on a government pension and died in 1974 at the age of 86, buried in Springfield, the same city where the rifle was born. 8 gold cartridges in a silver clip, the only ones that ever bore his name, and now you know why the rifle never needed to. Over 5 million M1 Garands, $0 in royalties, and the greatest battle implement ever devised. Do you think MacArthur was right to kill the .276 caliber? Would a lighter, lower recoil round have made the rifle even more effective, or did the .30-06 stockpiles justify the decision? Drop your thoughts in the comments.